on this particular day in the summer of 2007, working in the pattern. I'm coming downwind, and I looked out my left-hand canopy window, and I immediately was alerted to a bit of a streak of visible yellow-orange flame. And no sooner as I recognised that, I made my my left-hand banking turn now crosswind within the pattern. And as I came crosswind, you know, for real, you know, the fire sort of built up around me, and I noticed that it was kind of waxing, if you will, or growing externally, still outside the aircraft. I made a final left-hand banking turn now into wind, and this was my final approach. And the active runway that I was due to land on is way down there in the distance ahead of me. And remember, final turn into wind, left banking. And as I turned into wind, the fire immediately, that was external, that I'd noticed, breached the cockpit internally. So I looked down at my feet operating on the rudder pedal, and then suddenly there was flame that had breached, and it was starting to pick up around my feet and ankles down below. And initially there was some fluster. There was a bit of panic going on in my mind. And I'm thinking, my God, you know, this is for real. This is a situation. I've got to get this aircraft down. And I'm thinking about it. It's all coming on top in my mind. I'm getting flustered. But I am essentially piloting the aircraft. And my mind sort of harked back to one of the US flight instructors, who said to me, and I quote, and I've said this many times in recollection, you know, above all, if there's an emergency, you got a problem, fly the damned aircraft. And these words, they were like echoing, reverberating in my mind, in my memory of the training. And I thought, you know what, that's exactly what I've got to do, maintain control. So I kept my left hand on the control stick, my right hand on the throttle, and I'm still descending. So on the instrument panel in front, I'm literally watching altimeter spin down through now below 1,000 feet, where it had breached, through 900, 800 feet, 700 feet, 600 feet. The problem was, all the while, the flame from around my feet and ankle was starting to build up within the small confines of the two-seater cockpit. And before I knew it, I got to about half the height. So I'm about 500 feet indicated on altimeter. The fire is now about belly height. So it's literally, you know, just above my sort of belly within the small confines of the cockpit. And I knew this was a grave situation that I was facing. And I had to really think on my feet about how I was going to tackle that. And luckily, fortunately for me, I came up with a bit of a game plan or solution in order to try to get out of the cockpit or exit quicker than the norm. So what I did was just push the stick gently to my left. So left hand on that control stick between my knees, where I was sat in the left-hand seat. Just push the stick gently to my left, just a few degrees, away from the concrete runway in the distance. And I'm gliding in and I'm descending. And as I'm gliding in, I immediately followed what they call the emergency protocol. So I turned the key to the ignition off. I turned the red switches for what they call the magnetos in the cockpit, Alpha and Bravo magnetos off. The master switch off, the lights off, the strobes off, the fuel pump in the center column off. Rotate the fuel selector valve through 90 degrees. Everything off in sequence. And remember, coming in low level now. The communications with tower, with the air traffic control, was futile because I was too low and I was about to do what I was about to do. So I ripped off my headset, tossed it in the opposite footwell on the right-hand side of the cockpit, unbuckled my three-point harness. That was over the shoulders and around the waist. So unbuckled it carefully, wriggled out of the three-point harness, leant across to my left, carefully undid the latch for the door. And then I had to sort of push that open, but I had to also elbow it and strike it with the heel of my hand to sort of pop that door, because it was being held down by a bit of backwash from the external wind outside. There was a bit of pressure, if you will. So I managed to pop the door, thankfully. The door now open, so I've got an open aperture on my left side. but that was, which was great, obviously. But the problem was, immediately there was an influx of wind inside the cockpit. So what do you think that did to the flame inside the cockpit? That fed the flame, and it sort of aggressively pushed the flame up towards my face and my neck. And I kid you not, literally in those last moments, there I was sat in that seat on the left-hand side of the cockpit, my left hand on the control stick, my right hand on the throttle, which was fully off. And I was literally, and I'm hyperventilating through the corner of my mouth, if you will, in a vain bid to protect my airway from possible flame and smoke ingress. I was worried about the airway, and I'm also one eye shut in a bid to protect my eyesight because of the lapping flames. But I still had to obviously focus. So I'm looking forwards through the canopy, I'm looking left, looking right, and repeating that forwards, left, right. And I'm looking for traffic, hazards, obstacle, and I'm judging the height above ground as I'm gliding in. I've scrubbed off as much airspeed as I dared. And I kind of, with that kind of hand-eye coordination, if you will, I managed to glide in very low level. So I'm watching 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet, and then roughly 20 feet. And then I was like Jack Rabbit. So I managed to clamber up onto the seat and then climbed out through that open door aperture onto the left wing, which was a low wing, left wing or low wing aircraft. So I climbed onto the left wing, momentarily balanced myself and composed myself. I then took a giant leap off the trailing edge, the back of the left wing, only looking at the horizon while I jumped, snapped my hands together in the air in a sort of a prayer position. And I also snapped my feet and knees together in front of me, if you will. So it was a good old fashioned sort of British Army parachute sort of exit position. And I got away with it. When I made that jump off the back of the left wing, the truth was I executed the jump relatively cleanly, but I landed like a sack of spuds. So I'd probably estimate that I left the wing at about 15 feet above the ground as I was still gliding in. And I was probably running in or gliding in at about 30 knots, estimated, based on the sort of, again, that sort of visual, that hand-eye coordination. So it's still quite a height, at still a significant speed. So I landed like a sack of spuds. I landed feet first. I thrust forwards. I literally smashed my face. I had a nasal fracture, eye socket fractures on both sides from the impact. I ruptured my colon, my large intestine, internally. I also lacerated one side of my liver, which was now bleeding and hemorrhaging internally. I broke a couple of ribs in the process, fractured my collarbone here, the clavicle. I think it was right side. I think a couple of fingers I fractured. And I was a big trauma. So multiple fractures, internal injuries, again, from the jump and the secondary impact. But the worst of it, for the record, was I was 6'3" or 63% third and fourth degree burns. And that was the life changer for me. And for anybody that's not sure, I mean, you can Google all of this and it's all there in sort of medical sort of information. It's all public domain. But fourth degree burn means that effectively it's all three layers of skin, including the sort of the fattier, cellular sort of tissue, what they call epithelial tissue. And then the fourth degree essentially means it's burned through all of that, more or less down to the bone. So you've got some areas of exposed bone. So I was a big trauma. And, it was a life changer. I was very lucky to hold on. Remember, I talked about that kind of willpower. And I got airlifted from the scene. And the rest is history. I got the very best hospital that, insurance policy could buy. And in my case, some $2.7 million US at the time, 15 years ago, in 2007. And what can I say? Literally, I owe a massive debt of gratitude to the US medical authorities for, one, the emergency response, two, the emergency care that I received for 6 months in intensive care in Florida. And they pretty much put me back together again like Humpty Dumpty. over a long and protracted period. And then I made it, but it even surprises me. So that is pretty much the story in a nutshell, but a life changer. And unfortunately, my days with the military were done.